Operation Destroy All Hybrids has now begun. And with that, the first great hybrid war comes to a conclusion.
Today, I'm here to show off the Indom's Killer 1 score. GojiCenter still doesn't realize who's up against. GojiCenter had to warp the arena around them, paying off the ref and telling the audience to move away. Hank can and will hit with that level of force I gave him. As now, a dinosaur's arm worth of bone is being blasted out like a grenade. In today's video, I present to you why Hank still wins. I'm a very stubborn 19-year-old. It's time to go back to the basics.
Well, seems like someone's still uppity about a previous failing grade. Now, to catch everyone up to speed, many of you might recall how this whole hybrid war fiasco happened. Namely, after we made a new and improved Indominus Rex meant to eradicate as many creatures as possible on his Lanublar, the internet collectively decided to kill it. And the big frontrunner in this was our friend over at the channel Goji Guy, who for some reason took things personally, and was the first major player to step into the ring with his hulking creation, affectionately named Hank. And Hank, hanked himself. But after a whole year, it seems like GG decided to not call it a good game, even after we so graciously helped them design a fully functional Hank 2.0. So they came out swinging with a recent video packed with even more astronomically preposterous claims. A video that quickly popped up on our radar, making the argument that the original model would serve the purpose just fine, and that we had been unfair in the judgment to stack the deck against them by using that dreaded word, reality. The allegation goes that Hank was unfairly put through the rigors of reality unannounced, and that his colossal strength as the literal one-punch man of kaiju, a hybrid dinosaurs, would make him victorious over the creature he was meant to destroy all the same. Goji Guy is taking us to court in this totally purely for fun beef, but we jokingly beg to differ. And after a ridiculous court session, we're taking him back to school. So class is in session, folks, and somebody needs to pay attention during the lecture. But if you all want to see some well-built hybrids, you might want to check out our recently concluded First Great Hybrid War saga and remember things for the future. Let's just say there is a reason we're calling it the First War. But to get back to the topic at hand of an unruly student disputing a bad grade, let's beat some allegations that we made the scenario unfair by moving the goalpost and forcing realism where there was no business being any. And hey, Hank, take notes. Oh, right, he can't. In the description of the video, there's a pre-written study guide outlining all the notes we'll cover in this video and more. And it might be useful for anyone who might want to throw their hybrid into the ring in the future. To begin, we ask you this. Which of the following is a creature from the Jurassic franchise? A. Tyrannosaurus rex, a species identified in fossil form 120 years ago and cloned from prehistoric DNA fragments. B. Toothless, the Night Fury, a fictitious dragon who can fly so fast they look like a blur and have 6 limbs unlike any reptile ever did, while also being able to spew out bursts of plasma because it can. C. Denji the Chainsaw Devil, who can turn his head into a chainsaw and sprout more saws out of his body, because he's from a series titled Chainsaw Man and he's got to be on brand. D. Reiner the Armored Titan, who can enhance his durability with plates of biometal armor and extra thick plot armor to survive death flag after death flag his character got smacked with. If anyone picked anything but A, put the ChatGPT down and go outside to touch grass. Yes, there have been instances in the Jurassic franchise where plot overpowered physics for the sake of spectacle. Blue surviving a smack from the Indominus into concrete isn't a superpower, it's plot armor. Plot armor that stopped working when a mere handgun bullet put her in critical condition. Unless we're about to say this random guy was packing a mini railgun. However, at the end of the day, these are supposed to be flesh and blood creatures, constrained by some amount of reality and physics. Going off of this, when creating our hybrids, there were always aspects of realism because these aren't fantasy monsters. The only relatively fictional aspect of this hybrid concept is being able to gather viable genomes from extinct species' fossilized remains. and the technology and research required to gather precise genes from every animal in existence. But this thing called physics has always been a factor in the Jurassic franchise and has always been a factor in the hybrid war. We didn't make this up, those are the default settings in the Jurassic verse and in hybrid war. Goji Guy's claim that we applied the rules of realism to Hank unfairly is just as silly as building a sandcastle on a beach and yelling at the ocean because it didn't hold its shape. And let this be a lesson for anyone. You come to challenge the 2.0 or any of the viable hybrids in the hybrid war, and you play on our home turf. Can't warp the arena that was already being played in to begin with. And in this pitch, physics takes a heavy toll. Don't expect to pull up and pretend these rules won't magically apply to you either, Hank. Goji Guy in his last video said he was after all going to align himself with the rules of realism. But that very quickly fell apart, especially after the preposterous claim that Hank can just spawn out of nowhere.
After a year, I'll play by your rules. Let's rip Hank out of fiction, despite me blatantly saying that is where he's meant to be held. Let's use your real-world science. GojiCenter, you can't just add rules. Hank was spawned. That's it.
No, dude, in hundreds of millions or billions of years of the history of life on Earth, nothing had just spawned out of nowhere. It took billions for the right elements to form the first cell. It takes decades of research to understand genomes and years to splice correctly. And it takes time for organisms to develop to maturity. And in our turf, yes, that includes Hank. One would logically assume that in a more grounded scenario, any animal will have to grow to adulthood, a concept conveniently labeled as headcanon in Goji Guy's video. And during the growing process of Hank, its jacked up genome and body anatomy would prevent it from even reaching adolescence, even though this blatant magic goes completely against the whole point of genetic engineering in both the Jurassic franchise and hybrid war, and means Hank would have to be the handiwork of a wizard with cheat codes, grounds for the highest ranks of the Hall of Shame. And even with cheat codes, he's going to have issues, and a lot of what you're about to see here, and we hate to put it this way, is really just common sense. Goji Guy once again argued that Hank's arms, even if they would shatter, would still deal a fatal blow, completely ignoring the part where we mentioned that pistol shrimp mechanics would not work on land, and the effect relies heavily on how the physics of water works, not air. But we'll elaborate further in case this still wasn't clear enough. No, really, we didn't elaborate further because we trusted that it would already be clear that this weapon isn't viable to begin with, meaning this wouldn't even happen or even be a scenario. But guess we'll have to explain a bit more. In our first reply to Hank's self-deleting arms, we provided a rough estimate of how much force this blow had under the assumption that these were somehow viable weapons to begin with. We entertained the idea that if they were functional, they'd shatter. But Goji Guy interpreted this as an aha moment, thinking they had us pinned, claiming that in using this already unviable weapon, the shattered bone would hit the 2.0 like shrapnel, causing unrecoverable wounds. The reason a pistol shrimp can affect the physics of water the way it does has a lot to do with them being structured the way they are, at the size they are. Two elements here, their anatomy and their size. The bigger the animal gets, the more mass it has. The more mass it has, the more the physics change. Longtime viewers might remember us discussing the square cube law, but in very abbreviated terms for any newcomers, the general rule is that mass increases a lot faster than dimensions like length and height as you get bigger. If you took a man who was exactly 6 feet tall and 100 kilograms, then doubled his size, he wouldn't be 200 kilos. Instead, because his length, height, and width have all doubled, his mass is now 100 times 2 times 2 times 2, equaling 800 kilograms. All this dude's muscles and bones would have to be holding up 8 times more mass, and a lot of its strength would be devoted to just holding himself up. So this right here is why tiny animals like ants and beetles are proportionally very strong. Why? Because their mass is so minuscule that they can pretty much use all of their strength in moving objects. Something like an elephant has to devote a lot more of its power just to hold itself up. So proportionally, it is a lot weaker, even if it is absolutely much stronger overall than an insect. If strength stayed proportional with size, then we would have elephants that could casually juggle blue whales and buildings. If they had the relative strength of the dung beetles pushing balls of elephant crap moving dozens of times their mass. Does anyone else notice you don't see pistol shrimp the size of elephants? Or even bigger crustaceans like lobster? It's because the physics would just flat out not work at that size, nor would they keep the same power. In conclusion, certain abilities just don't scale past a certain size. This is one reason why this ability just won't work on Hank. At all, actually. And not to mention, we're going to have congruency issues combining arm mechanics between two animals with completely different limb anatomy. Side note for the class, it's actually the mantis shrimp that throws hard punches, not pistol shrimp. They do something completely different. Unless you say Hank was trying to give us a pinch, recheck thy crustaceans. Getting these simple facts wrong in court or class can cause a penalty. It cannot be more clear at this point. But no, this concept completely flew over Goji Guy's head. At this point, it may seem like Hank's once again getting scrapped from his fantastical weaponry. Hank's creator alleged we have no flair, no style, nothing special. Well, there's a reason we went with what was practical instead of fantastic. Fantastic does not work with animals. After all, as the Hall of Shame showed, something with the traits of a Bombardier beetle blown up to the size of a T-Rex would literally blow itself up. Now, let's say that we allowed this absurd punch, or pinch, to actually exist, and the aftermath was exactly what we showed in the last video. It was alleged that this literally explosive punch, even if it missed, would send lethal bone shards flying into our creation and still give Hank 2 good shots to kill. If its punching force was this extreme, even just a muscle twitch would be breaking his own bones and snapping his limbs just trying to walk up and fight. Don't believe us? Certain medical conditions like tetanus can cause muscles to twitch and fire off erratically, locking up joints or snapping your own limb bones. And considering how much of a complete mess Hank's genome was with multiple hybrid creatures already added to the mix, including the ball of crazy that was the Scorpius Rex, it would be a miracle if it didn't have similar problems. Goji Guy thought he was onto something when he proposed that even if Hank missed his critical hit, assuming it works, the explosion of his arm basically detonating would send lethal bone shards flying everywhere. If Hank decided blowing himself up was a viable strategy, some bone shards could possibly get lodged in the 2.0's hide, potentially even carrying bloodborne infections or poison. We simulated this, and it turns out this wouldn't be all that much of a problem. Not only because the bone fragments are not being fired out like pellets from a shotgun with a clean trajectory and direction, instead flying around in all directions and hitting Hank too, but because Hank's opponent has defenses against this. It's almost like we put that dwarf crocodile and shrew in here for both added physical and chemical defense. It's almost like someone wasn't even paying attention to what our hybrid was made of. And we're not done yet. The idea that an arm like flesh and bones can dissipate like shrapnel is also pretty unrealistic. Yeah, this concept is so bad in many aspects. The soft tissues like muscle attachments, tendons, and skin would actually serve as shock-absorbing agents to mitigate any piercing power inflicted by any bone shards. What you saw here, Goji Guy, was a low-budget rendition of what the aftermath would have looked like. But since it seems like it takes more to get you to understand, here's a 3D rendition of what it would look like if Hank actually could throw a punch like this. Hypothetically speaking, of course. Please observe. The said violent muscle twitching combined with ridiculously quick arm movement would inflict so much strain on the arm anatomy that it will still in fact make the arm shatter. But not like you think. The joints and tendons would rip, but they wouldn't quite fly everywhere. Those are still attached to soft tissue. These squishy shards will fly in the direction of the opponent, but also on Hank. Sure, some might cut, but all the flesh and elastic matter pulling back on these bone fragments would reduce their impact force exponentially. There's absolutely no way we can make this even more clear. And before you bring up that if this hit connects directly it would be enough to kill the Indom, don't forget that this maneuver isn't even feasible in the first place. Call it boring all you want, but no matter what you do or how much you complain or warp reality, it's the truth. A certain stubborn 18-year-old says we don't watch his videos. For the record, we're watching you, dude, and you guys should as well. But there is an old saying, the guiltiest dog barks the loudest. Getting back to the hypothetical, quite literal hand grenade, if we're to consult a wizard to get Hank suddenly spawned in with all these exact abilities, and it was truly capable of punching that hard, it now runs into yet another problem. If we were to set up this explosive ranged attack, tell us, who is actually closer to the explosion here? Let's just sit here and use our imagination for just a moment. But for Goji Guy, we took some time to render this in 3D in case this one also slips past you. Who has their throat literally right next to their arm? And who has a lot of arteries in said arm that would get shredded if they literally exploded and caused the thing to bleed out too quickly? An episode of blood loss so quick and violent that not even the Croc's ability to cut off circulation can save you in a split second. Whose body momentum will get dragged ever so closer to said explosion? Oh, what's that, Primatus? Did you pick option D? Nice job, dude! Goji Guy here was stacking his L streak. If you ever wanted to learn why super fantastical, flashy abilities just don't work in animals with any amount of reality, here's your answer. Hank does still have a pretty decent set of jaws. However, unless they are somehow crunching down with hundreds of times the force of a T-Rex, they would absolutely not be the one-shot attack they were made out to be. The sharp edges granted by the Dunkleosteus beak could certainly cut decently, but are still running into the problem of lacking the penetrating power or grip necessary to force through most of that chump. And even if it did, all it's doing is crunching down with roughly the same force as a T-Rex at the absolute best, and using subpar teeth to deliver it into an animal who is at least as tough, if not tougher, than a typical T-Rex, who have survived full-on chomps from other Rexes before. Almost like trying to chomp down very hard on some tough bony leather with some shears, and with a skull weakened by attributes from a Dunkleosteus and shrimp. Yeah, T-Rex already had a skull capable of absorbing very high crushing forces. This dude's head is nerfed to the point that it risks shattering its own skull. Contrast this with its opponent, who has jaws that can crunch down roughly as hard, with much stronger teeth, and just as much of a cutting edge. The only difference is this time they can actually withstand the forces involved. And at this point, discussing other aspects like a goring attack or Hank one-shotting with a bite as if he was chomping into wet tissue paper is a moot point. There's also still the problem of Hank accidentally making themselves vulnerable to the shrew venom with useless additives like tardigrade. Either Hank wakes up to reality and fights honestly without cheat codes from a wizard, or he self-destructs because of those powers. Ironically, Hank would put up a better fight if he aligned himself with more grounded physics, without trying to have Saitama's punch or sword-snapping chomp. It's almost like his base build was usable to begin with, and we needed only tweak it for the proper formatting like we gave Hank 2.0. But alas, congruity was always Hank's worst enemy, even more so than the hybrid it was designed to kill. There simply is far too much put in to work well together, and a vast majority of what was added in its genome is only making it worse. A hybrid is only as good as its genetic makeup. Otherwise, we would have flying, bulletproof gestalts of Ankylosaurus and Pteranodon, and it would start looking more like How to Train Your Dragon. But hybrid war has always aligned itself with the core principles of more grounded physics like in Jurassic. And we don't get cheat codes to try and completely break from biology, or spontaneously spawn like in a video game. Hank's design is still really cool, and it being the codifier of the term getting hanked is probably why the Hall of Shame turned out smaller than it would have been, thanks to people learning from Hank's past errors, regardless of his creator vigorously adhering to them. So, Goji Guy, as gracious teachers, we will give you a new assignment so you can get enough extra credit to pass the grade. Consider this a do-over since we already helped you design a new and improved Tank of a Hank before. Hundreds of entries in the Great Hybrid War, some by kids watching at home, turned in creatures that were grounded, practical, and could give our creation the fight of its life or potentially kill it. If they can do it, Goji Guy, you can too. Design a new hybrid with an express purpose. Plenty of weaponized monstrosities out there, so take a crack at building something to kill the original Indoraptor or Scorpius Rex in the same weight class. Stick to what is practical and usable and surprise us all. If you built Vex, you can certainly do this. Good luck. Oh, and let's all congratulate Hank for being resurrected as the new king of the Hall of Shame.